All right, and welcome everybody to the Exponential Groups webinar. And I want to give you an incentive. This is not to say that the webinar may not be any good, but if you stick with me all the way through the end of the webinar, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually offer you the second chapter of my book. You might have seen the first chapter already, but I'll send that to you, as well as a recording of the webinar. And I'm also going to send you the PowerPoint slides. So take whatever notes you want to, but don't feel like you have to give yourself writer's cramp, because I'll send all of those to you by email, and you'll be in good shape. All right, just introduce myself, and we've kind of talked a little bit already, but I've been a pastor for over 25 years now, which would be 26 years. My wife and I have been married for 16 years. We have 4 children, 15, 11, 9, and 3, and they're a lot of fun. So I have high school, middle school, elementary school, and preschool this year. I've coached over 1,500 churches in the last 11 years. Right now I'm working with 28 churches all across North America and doing a lot of other things. Since 2011, I've helped churches start over 14,000 groups, not people in groups, but actual groups. And last year, the 18 churches that I worked with started over 5,000 groups, which was pretty amazing. I mean, you do the math there. It's an average of 277 groups per church, where some were smaller, some were larger. They didn't all have 277. So what I do, I work with churches through individual coaching, through coaching groups, which makes it more affordable, and it's kind of fun to interact with each other. Online courses, and then I have a book coming out in February called Exponential Groups. And lastly, through my blog, which is probably how you heard about this webinar. And you can follow me on Twitter if you do that. I'm at Alan White. I don't tweet as much as I used to. Or on Facebook / Alan White Consulting. And that's where I usually post like my most recent blog posts and things like that if you want to follow there. All right, so let's talk about different types of growth. And I'm basing this on an article that I put out yesterday, actually. I was working on the plane Tuesday, coming back from Denver. And but I'm going to add a few thoughts and a few stories to what I shared in the post. But different types of growth. We can grow by addition. We can grow our groups by multiplication. We can grow with a campaign, or we can have what I call exponential growth. So let's go through each of these, and then I'm going to give you some steps to how to do some things maybe in a more exponential fashion. How about that? So growth by addition is this. Growth by addition means we look at our congregation and we see them as being sheep without a shepherd. Now, this auditorium is Brookwood Church here in the Greenville, South Carolina area. This is the last church that I served at before I went back into coaching and consulting churches 5 years ago. It was a church of about 6,500. But if you look at the congregation and you see all these people that are, potential group members, they need to be connected into groups. And so what we would tend to do, especially when you look at large numbers like this, and so whether your numbers are 100, dozens or hundreds or thousands, again, it's not the size that I'm talking about as much as the focus that I'm talking about. And so if we see them as sheep without a shepherd, then our focus becomes connecting members into groups. And so we put a lot of hard work into, okay, we need groups that meet geographically close so that people can actually connect with each other. We need groups that are different ages. We need groups that have different interests. We need groups, that do different kinds of Bible studies, and, men's groups and women's groups and couples groups and neighborhood groups and singles groups and everything else. And so basically we take people and we organize this according to what they need, and we place them in a group in some form or fashion. Now, in order to do this, we have to have leaders. And so typically in growth by addition, that means that we're handpicking our leaders. And I did this for a very long time. In fact, this was about the only thing we did for a very long time. And initially we did this, it was intentional that we handpicked the leaders because we want to be very careful that we had the right people. But then over time, as we tried other methods that didn't work out so much, we basically defaulted back to handpicking our leaders, which the problem with that is that groups don't grow at a very rapid pace. They grow very slowly as far as the number of groups, simply because handpicking leaders. And then as your church gets larger and you don't know everyone as well, it's hard to identify and handpick those leaders. So again, focuses on connecting members. The strategy is to handpick leaders. The method tends to be a sign-up card or a website. So if you want to be a group, sign up on a card and tell us how old you are and where you live, what type of group you want to be a part of, and we'll find a group for you or make a group for you or what have you. Now, the issue with this is that it's a lot of effort, but you get very little result. Whether they're turning in a card, you're placing them in a group, well, then you have problems like the leader is not calling the people that want to be in the groups, or the people get a call from the leader, but then they don't show up, or they're with the group for a while and then they drop out and they don't stick with the group because, you know, the groups are kind of, forgive the term, they're more or less artificially created. And so because of that, because they don't really know each other, because they don't have this strong connection, then they don't have a reason, you know, in a lot of cases to continue. So the reason we have these problems is that you can never recruit enough leaders by yourself. And this is what I tried. And honestly, I felt that handpicking leaders, it was going to take me at least 100 years to catch up with the growth of our church. The problem was our church kept growing. There was no way I could do that. And then often the members don't stick to the groups. And so a lot of these things with sign-up cards and websites and trying to create groups for people and all of that sort of stuff, it seems efficient, but the problem is it's not really effective. Now, if you're doing this and you're having success with this and this is meeting the need of your church, then I'm not going to discourage you from doing this, but I do want to challenge you maybe to look into some other things. So let's talk about growth by multiplication. And growth by multiplication, again, looks out at the congregation and says, how many of these people could lead a group? And so in growth by multiplication, you focus on developing group leaders. And so the strategy is that you want the group leaders to identify someone in their group who could also eventually lead, and that person becomes their apprentice. So you train the apprentice in the group, and then the hope is that once the apprentice is trained, that group somehow splits up and they form two groups. Now, this is what's known as the classic meta-church model that was popularized by my friend and mentor, Carl George, in a book he wrote about 20 years ago called Prepare Your Church for the Future. He'd been over and had examined the model at Dr. Cho's church in Korea and had brought that back over. Now, this is what I took on, and I thought this is going to be a great way to multiply our groups and to catch up with our growth because our church was growing. And as Rick Warren says, you know, a church needs to grow larger and smaller at the same time. So larger in the sense that we're reaching out into our community and more people are attending, but smaller in the sense that everyone needs to be in a group. So I set out, I had this 5-year plan. And my 5-year plan was that we started out, we recruited 10 leaders or couples to lead groups and trained them and then launched them into leading groups. And then those 10 were all going to identify an apprentice, and then the apprentice would either stay with the group and then the current leader of the group would move on to start a new group, or the reverse, the leader would stay, the apprentice would go, or you'd split the group in half, and half the group would go one way, half the group would go the other way. So I thought, well, every year we're essentially going to double our groups, and then we'll add a few more to that. So I thought, you know, we'll make this 5-year plan, and in 5 years we'll have enough groups not only to accommodate the people that we currently have, but also to accommodate the growth that our congregation was experiencing to keep pace with that. Well, the problem came is that we got to the point where we were 7 years into the 5-year plan. Things were not working the way that we thought. My group leaders couldn't identify an apprentice. Now, here's the crazy thing. I would actually recruit people out of their groups to put them in a turbo group, which the turbo group was for the purpose of training the leaders and then releasing them to start their own groups. And so I would put them in the turbo groups, and they would launch groups, but for whatever reason, when they were in their original small group, their leader didn't recognize their potential as an apprentice. And I put a lot of pressure on the leaders because I felt like the future of our groups, maybe the future of our church, the future of my job, depending on them finding an apprentice. And it got to the point that on Sunday mornings, they would walk past me and they would say, "I'm working on my apprentice." And I thought, whatever happened to hello? But there was so much pressure on that. We finally ditched the whole model. And maybe our church wasn't the right environment for that model, but it didn't work. So again, the result we found was that our group members didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave our group. They didn't want to start a new group. They didn't want to help a new group get started. They wanted to stay where they were because they were comfortable. And so we did not experience a lot of multiplication. Now, what I have done differently than that is I don't require groups to do that. But if a group becomes so large that it becomes uncomfortable to the group and everybody can't get a word in, then often the groups will seek out a solution for, we're overwhelmed, we have too many people, what do we do? And then they might be open to dividing up the group into two different places. But prior to that, I've had a hard time, I've been kind of the heavy, coming down on them saying, hey, you're at a certain size, you need to think about doing that. So again, my issues were that the leaders cannot identify an apprentice. The group members wanted to stay together. And so genuinely at this point in this idea of multiplication, which really reverted back to growth by addition, we felt very, very stuck. And so we went into the next thing, which would be the growth by campaign. And in the growth by campaign, the question that we ask is we look at our congregation, we say, can we connect 100% or more of our people into groups? And so we just basically leapfrogged the idea of growth by multiplication and went to this growth by campaign. And our focus was connecting anybody and everybody. Our strategy was that people would self-identify as leaders. Now, what that simply means is the pastor would stand up on Sunday morning and say, we've created these materials to go along with my next series, or we've purchased materials to go along with the series, or 40 Days of Purpose, those sorts of things. And if you would like to open up your home and be a host, or if you would like to get together with a group of friends and do the study, then we're going to support you and help you get your group started. And so the methodology was you had some kind of video-based curriculum because video curriculum brought a lot of assurance on both sides of the equation. For the person that was willing to open up their home or gather some friends and do a study, the video-based curriculum meant that they did not have to be the teacher in the group because the teacher was the speaker on the video or their pastor on the video, so they didn't have to be the teacher. Now, this was also reassuring to the church because these people volunteered, and again, you might vet them or interview them, or you may already know them, but the idea was that if you had people that you didn't feel were qualified to teach, they weren't teaching. They were showing a video to get the discussion started. And so you knew what was being taught in the groups because it's your video, or it's a video that you purchased. The other idea was these were short-term groups that we would say, would you do a 6-week study? And so they're committing to 6 weeks to kind of give this a trial run so that you can get an idea of is this something they like to do? Is this something that they want to continue doing, or this isn't their gifting, this isn't what they're interested in, and they don't want to continue this on. So in our church back in, it's been a few years now, back in 2004, excuse me, I'm getting over the whole thing, we did an aligned series with the Passion of the Christ. And what I mean is our pastor had already planned a sermon series on Sunday morning, and I asked him if we could launch groups with it, and he was very excited about that. And so we found a study guide on the Passion of the Christ, but we needed to make a video. So he agreed to make the videos. And the crazy thing is that we were only 1 week ahead of the groups. And so I'll put them to VHS tape. Again, this is back in 2004. And so every week I ran this tape exchange in my office where my leaders would bring last week's tape and I would give them this week's tape, and then last week's tape would go to the duplicator, become next week's tape. And we shot a video every week for 6 weeks in a row. Wish we'd have some of the streaming media options that we have now, but we were stuck with good old VHS tape. But here's the thing. After 7 years of handpicking leaders and getting to 30% of our adults in groups and feeling very, very stuck, my pastor stood up on a Sunday morning and he said, we'd like to invite you to open up your homes and have one of these groups on the Passion of the Christ, and we'll support you and help you get you started. It's based on these materials that we've made. And we actually doubled our groups in one day. I mean, it had taken 7 years to get to that point, and we doubled in a single day. And so the result we found was this, that we had a lot of excitement for the 6 weeks, but then with a lot of campaigns, the bottom falls out. It doesn't have to, but with a lot of campaigns, the bottom falls out. But what we did experience was potential for being exponential in our groups. In fact, within 6 months, we were at a place where we had 125% of our average adult attendance in groups. Now, how did we get there? Well, the reason that a lot of this falls off after 6 weeks is that there's no plan for after the 6 weeks. So they commit to 6 weeks, they do 6 weeks, they think they're done. Well, you can ask them to continue. Also, the growth often overwhelms coaching structure. And so if you don't have coaches in place to support the new leaders, which could be as simple as asking the established leaders to walk alongside a new leader. But they need support. They need help as they go. And we're going to get into that a little more later. But we actually, like I said, within 6 months, we got to a place where we had 125% of our adults in groups. Now, so I'll just give you the actual numbers. We had 800 adults on the weekend, and we had 1,000 adults in groups. And that's not funny pastor math. We had groups that met in break rooms at work. We had groups that met in coffee shops together. We had groups that met on a commuter train, and one group that met on a commuter train. But people would invite their friends. They would already be meeting regularly with their friends, and then what they discovered was they could actually take the study and do it with the friends they already had. They didn't have to have new people thrown in if they didn't want that. But a lot of them were open to that. And so we would have, a small group connection event where people would come and meet the leaders, sign up to be in a specific group, which I think is better than a sign-up card for sure. But the thing that worked the best for us was people looked at the relationships they already had and personally invited people that they already knew to join them for the study. And to me, that was better than pretty much anything else that we had done up to that point. So as we begin to get a little taste of what it meant to have exponential groups, let's talk about having exponential growth in groups. All right. A little interruption there. All right. So when we go back and look at this congregation, the question that we need to ask ourselves is this an audience or is this an army? You see, what we were doing back in the 90s was we were doing an attractional model. We would put on a pretty good show for people. And I'm very direct. I am a Kansan. You guys understand Kansas. I'm not saying we didn't do anything that was unspiritual or bad. But basically, we changed the music to music that people enjoyed, which, you know what? When I go to church, I like to have music that I enjoy. We changed messages to be relevant. We actually told people things like, we're so glad you're here today. We want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the service. So we invited people in to fill up the house, and then the invitation was come and get comfortable. And then we wondered why we couldn't get anybody to do anything, because they took us up on their offer to get comfortable. So when we look at this audience, is this a group of people that we serve to meet all of their needs, which requires a lot of staff? This particular church had over 150 staff, which is a little mind-boggling. I mean, my last church had 5 people. Is this a group of people that we're serving and we're meeting all their needs and we're setting up all this stuff for them? Or instead of an audience, is this an army? And we serve them by equipping them. and we send them out so that they can connect with people that they know and begin to do groups in the community. So here's the thing. So if we actually take this group of people in our church and you look at your congregation, you said, what if everybody in my church was leading a group? Well, the first question that comes to mind is if everybody's leading, then who's in the group? Well, here's the good news. There are more people outside of your church than there are inside your church. You just have to pick the right kind of study that they would be interested in doing. So is this an audience or is this an army? And if we're thinking exponentially, we have to begin to look at our congregation as an army. So exponential growth sounds like this. Our focus is that every member can gather a group. How do you know that somebody's a leader? Steve Gladen puts it this way. You know somebody's a leader because they have friends, because they have followers. And so if they can influence somebody on the best restaurant in town or what movie to see or whatever else, they can also influence them by inviting them to their house and let's do this Bible study about some common need, whether it be stress or conflict or living a balanced life or, whatever. The strategy is to give people permission and opportunity that if you would like to give this a try, we're going to support you. We're going to help you. You pick the people who you want in the group. You meet wherever you want. You meet whenever you want. And you do a group on your own terms. And for some people, this is very helpful because they have crazy job schedules and they can't commit to a regular ongoing group, or they have special needs children, or they're more introverted and they don't want to open their house and have a dozen strangers show up, but they would do a study with 5 or 6 very good friends. Or, they get off work at midnight because they work swing shift and they're not ready to go to bed, but who wants to do a group at midnight? Well, maybe some other people that work swing shift, maybe people that they already work with and know. They can go hang out at Waffle House and have a Bible study at midnight. Why not? I'd do that. All right, the methodology is this. You want to offer an easy-to-use curriculum. And again, typically something that is video-based, so they aren't given the responsibility of doing the teaching. You want to give them some kind of basic training and then ongoing training. A lot of people now are, creating 2-minute videos and sending them out so they can watch it on their phone instead of trying to get everybody back to do meetings. Because I discovered after a lot of years of banging my head against the wall, people don't like meetings and they're hard to get to and all of that. And then the biggest piece is to have some kind of coaching support. And so you begin to focus not on how do I connect people into groups. You don't focus on how do I recruit leaders. You focus on building the support structure, the coaching structure that's going to sustain this over time. Because if you don't have coaches in this, you're sunk because you'll be completely overwhelmed. The result is that people are connected both inside and outside the church and that the groups tend to last longer. Because what I found is that groups of friends last longer than groups of strangers. You throw people together in a group because they're in the same zip code or they need Tuesday night, and they may or may not develop a relationship, and often they don't. But if you have somebody get together with their friends at a convenient time and they're people that they already know, then those groups will tend to last because they want to make time for their friends. Now, the reason here is you leverage existing relationships. And so I saw a lot of groups. I had people come up to the table. One gal came up and said, I have three friends. We meet every Thursday morning at Starbucks for coffee. Could we be a group? And I said, absolutely. I had another gal that came up and she said, I want to start one of these groups, but would it be okay? Again, she's asking for permission. Would it be okay if everybody who joined my group did not attend this church? I didn't even say yes. I just went around the table and gave her a hug. So they need permission to start a group on their terms. Now, that doesn't mean something that's outrageous. We need to have some boundaries here. They need to know where the markers are so they can stay in their lane. But most people, their mission is not to go out and wreck your church. They want to have community. They want to grow spiritually. And so we give them an opportunity to do this. So it's not a matter of I get together with my friends and we go out and have fun and watch movies and that sort of thing, which is part of group life. But they need to also have a Bible study, because you can't say, how some groups, they ride motorcycles or bicycles or make barbecue or whatever else, and they don't ever get to a Bible study. And I have to stop and look at that and say, how is this a small group at a church and not something that should be at the YMCA? And so I think there need to be definitely components in there. Maybe I'm old school, but I think they need a Bible study. All right, so let's talk about 4 keys to an exponential group launch. The first key is the question, is your senior pastor all in? How does your senior pastor feel about groups? Now, some of us are against some tough things. You'd say, well, I would love that. I would love to have my senior pastor promoting groups. I would love to have my senior pastor all in for groups. I would love that, but my pastor doesn't talk about groups, or my pastor's not in a group, or my pastor doesn't preach about community, or my pastor sees groups as one of many options in the church, or as I prefer to say, competing values. And so how do you do this? Well, the easiest way to get your senior pastor engaged in small groups is to put your pastor's teaching on the curriculum. Now, this is Chip Ingram. He pastors Venture Church out in Los Gatos, California. He's also has a ministry called Living on the Edge. And now Chip has a few more assets than most churches do, in that he has video production people on his team and he has his little studio in his church. But Chip's church is about 2,200 people. We did this series last summer, or summer of 2015, and they launched their groups with this series called Holy Ambition last fall. They had 120 groups when we started, and they ended up with 400 groups. And the invitation was, who is in your life that would enjoy or benefit from a study like this? We're going to train you. We're going to give you the materials, and then you go out and find people that you know. And so we had a man that came up and he said, I go to Shanghai 7 times a year. What would be the best way to take this into Shanghai? Or we had another gal that came up and said that she worked for a design firm and that most of the people she worked with were gay. And so she said, they know I'm a Christian. When they have problems come up, they ask me to pray for them. She said, I'm going to invite them to do this Bible study with me. And again, it was a matter of giving people permission, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, people that you know in the community, the other parents that are hanging out on the sidelines during soccer practice or baseball practice or, whatever else. And we gave them an easy to use tool. Now, you don't have to have a production studio and people on your staff that do video. I have a church in Canada right now that they shoot a video every week, 5-minute video that they put with their discussion guide, and they shoot it on an iPhone. And it's amazing, the quality of the thing, both the audio and the visual. I thought they were using something else, but it's an iPhone. So you don't need to get too techie on this. Even if you have the assets to do that, you don't need to get too much on that. But the difference is, I had one pastor in Florida that we spent a day shooting video with him. His team did all the work. And the next day he pulled us into his office and he said, now we've shot this video, we're creating this curriculum. How do we recruit leaders and how do we get people into groups? And the discipleship pastor came to me later in the day and he said, I've been trying to get my senior pastor interested in groups for 2 years. He said, and you just did it. Almost like accusing me. I said, well, I'm Alan White. No, I did not say that. But the thing was, the pastor had made an investment. And because the pastor had made an investment, then the pastor was very interested in getting things going. You want to find a small group solution for your senior pastor's every issue. So if they're worried about, getting people into church, if they're worried about, maintaining or increasing attendance, if they're worried about giving or having enough people to serve, studies show that people in groups give more and serve more than people who are not in groups. And you can look at Transformational Groups by Ed Stetzer and Eric Geiger. You can look at, the other name is escaping me right now, but it's a book by Robert Wuth now. and goes back a few years. He was a professor at Princeton University, and he actually came up with very similar findings. You want to get your pastor on this webinar with me. So you want your to grow your groups, get your pastor involved. I'm doing this again next Tuesday, so invite your pastor to join you and come on to the webinar. The key number 2 is you want to make sure that the topic of your curriculum is relevant. I've had churches do things like a series on fasting, a series on giving, a series on how to evangelize, and these are all very good topics for church members. But these are not great topics to go to your neighbor and say, we're going to do this series on giving money to the church. Would you like to join me? They're probably not even going to say no. They're just going to slam the door in your face because these are more mature kinds of topics. But if you look at things like, the Purpose-Driven Life from Saddleback and Rick Warren, and what a tremendous impact that's had. 1 Month to Live from Carrie Shook. Hope Rising. Gene Apple did this series at his church in Anaheim, California after Easter a few years ago. They started 460 groups off of this on Easter. Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania did a series called Monsters Under the Bed. And they actually did 2 back-to-back series last year, one in the new year, one after Easter. And they compared the first 6 months of 2015 with the first 6 months of 2014. And what they discovered was their attendance had increased by 7.5%, and their giving had increased by 7%. And the only thing that they had done differently was to create curriculum and get their people into groups. Study called Hand-Me-Downs, United Methodist Church in Warner Robins, Georgia. It's a church of 2,500. We actually started 500 groups in this church. And the last I talked to their small group pastor, they had double their weekend attendance in groups because people were inviting others that they were already in relationship with to do a study with them. Family Matters, a church out of Carmel, Indiana. It's a church of 4,000. They already had 75% of their adults in groups. We did this series, the first one that the senior pastor had ever done. It was based on previous sermons that he had preached. So it wasn't coming up with brand new material. We were just kind of doing a new version of it. So they already had 3,000 of their 4,000 people in groups. We launched another 200 groups with this series. So it was pretty remarkable. Key number 3, let's talk about coaching structure. And a lot of times we talk about coaching, it gives us a little fear and trepidation. But here's the thing, is if you have groups that are going and your coaching is not what it should be, the reality is that your groups have figured out good enough how to keep going. And so instead of looking at, I'm not doing very well with the groups that I have, what if I get a bunch more? Look at the groups that have worked it out and are continuing. And those are your potential coaches. You see, when you get a bunch of groups started, it's mission critical that all of those people who say, I want to gather my friends or want to open my home to do groups, however you want to do that, it's mission critical for them from the time they say yes until the end of the series that they have somebody who's calling them every week, answering their questions, encouraging them, and praying for them, because things happen like this. You say, okay, here's some people that I want to invite to my groups. We have a barbecue, and I want to invite them to the group, and the guy in the blue shirt here is the leader. And so he said, hey, I'm going to start a small group, and it's going to meet on Tuesday night. Who's in? And somebody said, oh, we're already in a small group. We're so sorry. We're not going to be able to make it. And then 2 more say, oh, we do something else on Tuesday night. That's not a good night for us. And then the other guy says, well, I'm sorry. I'm I'm really not your friend. I'm just here for the burger. And, and so then you're going to get discouraged, right? You're going to say, why in the world did I do this? Why in the world did I decide to stick my neck out? Because all these people that I invited have said no. Well, that's when they need a coach to give them a call and to encourage them. Say, how's it going? Not good. This was a mistake. Everybody asked said no. And to say, you know what? Not everybody that I've ever invited said yes. So let's keep praying. Let's keep thinking about who God would have in your group. And so again, you need to tap the shoulder of some of your established leaders and ask them to walk alongside a new leader and put your put your focus on coaching more than recruiting leaders, more than connecting people into groups. This is the work. Because if your pastor is inviting people to gather their friends and do a group, or to open up their home to host a group, then that's where you're going to get your leaders. And if your leaders truly have the stuff to do a group, they're going to invite people that they know to do the study with them. They're going to be able to gather a group. Now, there may be people that don't get invited, and you'll need to have some kind of a small group fair or connection event or group link or something to get them connected. But, that's more in the category of the exceptions. You don't want to set up a whole system just for the exceptions. But you want to accommodate them in some way that's not a sign-up card, that's not a church website. All right, so key number 4, this is the last one. What's the next step? So you get to, after a 6-week campaign, your 40-day campaign, and you're at day 41, what do? You need to offer them a next step. You need to say in the middle of the current series, oh, by the way, if you enjoyed meeting together, we're going to offer another series, not a selection, but one series if your group would like to continue. And then you want that group to decide whether or not they're going to continue before the current study ends. And if you do this right, you should have 80% of your new leaders continuing on into a second study. And then you get into, adding some training, adding some qualifications, that sort of thing, if they want to be a permanent group. But we will have to save that for another time. So let me tell you about a few churches I've worked with in the last few years. Van Dyke Church in Florida, great United Methodist church of about 1,800 adults. They were stuck at about 30%. They had 400 adults in groups. We helped them produce curriculum. We added some new strategies of how we connected people into groups. The first time out, they added 60 new groups. And so they went from 400 adults in groups to 1,000. Second time out, we did in January of 2012. They went from 1,000 groups to 1,600. And in the third series we did after Easter in 2012, they actually topped 2,000, still having 1,800. Now, the church has grown since then. I just did an interview with the pastor, and they're at about 2,300 on the weekend, but they're still at about 80 to 90% of their adults connected into groups. And so that's a pretty good story. St. Peter's Episcopal in Orlando is my friend Charlie Holt is the pastor there. When they were a church of 260 adults about 10 years ago, they started 75 groups for 40 days of purpose. So you have a church of 260 adults that actually connected 750 people into groups. So they had 3 times the number of people in groups that they had on the weekend. Now, how did they do that? He challenged his members to take the curriculum into their neighborhoods and invite their friends and neighbors to do the study with them. And they did it, and it was amazing. This is Pastor Troy Jones at New Life Center in Renton, Washington. Great Assemblies of God church that is very far from the buckle of the Bible Belt. It's a church of 2,500 adults. When I started with them, they had 100 small groups. We produced curriculum with Pastor Troy's teaching on it. We added some different strategies of how people could start groups and get connected into groups. 6 months later, after doing 2 series, this church of 2,500 had 500 groups. And he's made it a goal to have 1,000 groups in their church, because he saw through developing the curriculum and giving his people permission and the opportunity to connect with people that they knew, that this was having a strong outreach impact in their community, and people were coming to their friend's house, which was a very safe place, to do a Bible study. They were being introduced to Pastor Troy on the video, and then when they were invited to church, they felt like they already knew Troy because they had spent 6 weeks getting to know him in the comfort of their friend's living room, and it began to increase the attendance of their church. And so they are, gung-ho on this. It's pretty amazing. So how can I help your church? And again, if you, this is going to be short, but if you stick to the end, I am going to give you that chapter to my book. So what I'm forming is a 6-month coaching group, and it's going to start in January, go through June of 2017. And in the coaching group, this is what we're going to do. I have 4 groups that are meeting right now. And so we're going to cover the current needs in your church's small group ministry. So even though it's a group, it's small enough that we can talk about, the uniqueness of each church, whether that's the area of the country you live in, the culture of your neighborhood, the culture of your church, the denomination or association that you're a part of. A lot of those things factor in. Like I said earlier, I'm working with 28 churches right now, and I'm bringing to them the best practices that I've learned over the last 25 years from coaching a lot of other churches as well as working with the churches that I served. But what we ended up doing is basically 28 versions of the same thing. But it has to be, what's going to work in Washington State and what's going to work in Utah and what's going to work in the South and what's going to work in Canada. There's some tweaks. There's some things that you do a little bit differently because it's not cookie cutter at all. How to engage your senior pastoring groups, which we just talked about that a little bit. Effective recruiting strategies. Getting down to specifics of what you say in a service, how you get people to respond, what you do when they respond. I mean, down to micro. Sustaining groups through coaching and training. So how to build a coaching structure, what training to offer when, what to train people on, how much training is too much, how much training is not enough. The latest trends in curriculum. There's a lot of different things happening with curriculum nowadays, especially with streaming video and digital media. And some of the stuff is not that expensive. In fact, to do a lot of things, streaming are less expensive than having to create DVDs and all of that business. How to produce your own curriculum, effectively tracking your groups and what metrics to use. So what do you count? What's important? Why do you count it? How do you count it? Building groups while you're wearing many hats. I've never been in a role where small groups was 100% of my job. Well, until now. I work for myself, though. But in both churches I served, one was a church of about 1,500. The other was a church of 6,500. I had many, many hats to wear. And so when you're doing that, you want to keep a focus on groups, but you got to focus on the other stuff too. Creating a small group team. How do you find, big L leaders in the church that you can recruit to be part of your small group team and help you manage your groups? So let's talk about, what would go into this. We would talk about goal setting and strategic planning for your church. You would actually have some documents that would say what you need to do when, and here's a timeline, and here's some things to back it up. So executable timelines and support to achieve your goals. So it's one thing to get a bunch of information. This is why I was even reluctant to do an online course, because you can have the information and you can either not ever look at it, or it sits around, or you look at it and go, well, that's pretty good. But what we do in the group is actually help you as you're taking steps, and then debrief on what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to adjust, some of those kinds of things. So it's a little more, a lot more hands-on than just doing a course. So we have regular teleconferences with other churches and me over something like GoToMeeting like this, so we could see each other, talk to each other. I have a private Facebook group for interaction. So outside of the group, we could get on the Facebook group and talk about what we did well, or if you created some, amazing promotional piece for your groups, then you could upload that and everybody could see that. We have lifetime access to the recordings of the group meetings, so that if we covered something that maybe you didn't need today, but you need 6 months from now, you can go back and listen to the recordings. Give you tools, samples, intellectual property. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can actually say, okay, here's an example of a briefing kit for new leaders, or here's a few examples. So I'm going to take these ideas, I'm going to make my own, and if you make it better, then I'll just start sharing your example instead of mine. Also, you would get other manuscripts of my book. The way we do this is either you view a video from my online course, or you read a chapter of the book, and then we get together and we talk about how is this going to work in our church situation. So every week is not a lecture, kind of like what you're experiencing now. The first group is going to start in January of 2017. There's a limited number of spots. If you don't make it into the January group, then you'll be put on a waiting list for when we get enough people to start the next group. But January is what we're working on now. So how much does the coaching cost? The churches that I coach individually pay anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 per month for 12 months. I have two churches that are doing this right now. They both pay $2,000 a month. And they get, 100% personal attention, and I go visit them, and, all of that sort of stuff. And if you want to do that, we can talk about that. But in this offer, what I'm going to do is offer you some options so that you pay for what you need. So option one is this. You would have the 12 group sessions over 6 months, so 2 group meetings per month. I used to do weekly group meetings, and it was just like too much. And so at least every other week, if there's a homework assignment or something, you have time to do it before the next meeting. You would have lifetime access to my online courses. I have 2 courses. One's called Leading an Exponential Group Launch. The other one that's in development is called Coaching Exponential Groups. They have templates, tools, timelines, things that are proven, things that work, scripts of what to say, bullet points of that you can hand your pastor to say, this is what I need you to say in the service this week. So these bonuses add up to $2,800-ish. This option for these things would cost $1,499 or 5 payments of $300. Option 2 is everything that you get in option 1, plus you would get 6 monthly one-on-one meetings with me. And so adding that in, your bonuses are about $3,700. The cost is $1,999 or 5 payments of $400. And then the option 3 is everything we just talked about, including the one-on-ones. And I would add to that an on-site assessment, including me coming out and spending a day with your team. But it also involves collecting some data about the members of your church, your current groups, and then I would be making recommendations for the way to go and spend a day with you, talk to your pastor, talk to your other staff that are involved. And so the bonuses here are about $6,200. This is, the most expensive option, but it goes for $29.99 or 5 payments of $600, and then the travel expenses would be invoiced separately because, some people live further away than others. And so, again, option 1 is the group coaching, the courses, the templates, and all of that for $14.99. Option 2, we're going to take everything from option 1 and add the one-on-one meetings, so it's $19.99. And then option 3 adds the on-site assessment, which is $29.99, and then plus the whatever travel expenses would be. If you get into this and in the first 30 days you go, this is not quite what I thought it would be, then I will give you your money back. No questions asked. You get into this and you think this is not what I thought. So I'm taking on all the risk. And so if you want to put down the first payment towards something, end of January, you say this is not for me, then I'll just give you your money back. And you can keep all the information that you have. So an additional bonus is this. If you decide to register in the next 7 days, I'm going to give you a few other things because the group's not starting to January. This is October. What if I want to do something in January, right? So if you register in the next 7 days, then I'll give you 3 one-on-one calls before the group starts. You could have one in October, one in November, one in December, and we could talk about January. We do 1 group meeting. I'm actually getting all of my groups together the second week of November, I believe, and Greg Hawkins is going to be our guest. Greg is the ministry development pastor at Oak Hills Church in San Antonio with Max Lucado and Randy Frazee. Prior to that, Greg was the executive pastor at Willow Creek in Chicago with Bill Hybels and was executive pastor there for 20 years. He's also one of the creators of the Reveal study, and he's authored a number of books that go along with Reveal. So it'll be great to get together with Greg and talk to him about some of the implications for groups and things like that. So and then also, if you sign up in the next 7 days, we would start planning for your January 2017 group launch. So if you want to pay, the whole thing, then you can pay that next 7 days. Here we go. If you want to choose one of the options and make the first payment now, then we can get started, and then your next payment is not going to happen until January. So that is the story, and so if you're interested in that, you can either email me, alan@alanwhite.org, or there is my cell phone number, and we can talk further. All right, so this is the end of the webinar, and so I'm going to stop the recording.